Hey guys, it's Penelope in London. Today I'm going to read to you part 2, chapter 2 of this book. It's a couple of pages and it's on the shadow. And currently we're seeing the shadow play out in a big way in society as we've moved through the years of relating it to astrology with Pluto in Capricorn. It entered there in 2008. And I do believe that Jung's work was written for now. And this book is part of also the archetypes and the collective unconscious, which is, you can read them either way. We don't know which was written first, but they go together, volume 9. And what I want to explain then is how Lilith comes into this with it from an astrological point of view, and also Pluto, which is the unconscious, and we've got what lays below the surface, and then we've got Lilith, which is our gut instinct. It's, the lower chakras in the Lilith, Garden of Eden, and such like, would not lay below Adam and was outcast. There isn't much mention of her in the Bible. I think there's one incident where she was mentioned, which I can't recall right now. But I do believe that the shadow is the work that humanity needs to do. And I'm going to read these couple of pages and then bring up the astrology chart, which shows the movement of Lilith, and just explain a little bit about Lilith to you. So the shadow, and this is Carl Jung. He says, whereas the contents of the personal unconscious are acquired during the individual's lifetime, the contents of the collective unconscious are invariably archetypes that were present from the beginning. Their relation to the instincts have been discussed elsewhere. The archetypes most clearly characterized from the empirical point of view are those which have the most frequent and the most disturbing influence on the ego. These are the shadow and the anima and the animus. The most accessible of these and the easiest to experience is the shadow, for its nature can in large measure be inferred from the contents of the personal unconscious. So, he's saying we have our personal unconscious and then we have the collective unconscious. The only expectations to the rule are those rare cases where the positive qualities of the personality are repressed, and the ego, in consequence, plays an essentially negative or unfavorable role. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is an essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge, and it is therefore, as a rule, meets with considerable resistance. Indeed, self-knowledge as a psychotherapeutic measure frequently requires much painstaking work extending over a long period. Closer examination of the dark characteristics, that is, the inferiorities constituting the shadow, reveals that they have an emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, and accordingly, or an obsessive or better possessive quality. Emotion, incidentally, is not an activity of the individual, but something that happens to him. Effects occur usually where adaptation is weakest, and at the same time, they reveal the reason for its weakness, namely a certain degree of inferiority and the existence of a lower level of personality. On this lower level, which is uncontrolled or scarcely controlled, emotions, one behaves more or less like a primitive who is not only the passive victim of his effects, but also singularity incapable of moral judgment. So the thing is, this is where Lilith would come in, and that's why I'm going to bring up the chart. And it's really good to digest what Jung is saying here. It's very deep stuff. It's written for now. It's written for this time. And we, as the years go by, I'm sure more and more people will be reading his work and understanding the usefulness of it. Continuing reading, although with insight and goodwill, the shadow can to some extent be assimilated into the conscious personality. Experience shows there are certain features which offer the most obstinate resistance to moral control and prove almost impossible to influence. These resistances, and I will add there, resistance would be the Pluto aspect. These resistances are usually bound up with projections which are not recognized as such, and their recognition is a moral achievement beyond the ordinary. So if we look at our shadow, he is saying it is beyond, recognition is a moral achievement beyond the ordinary, because ordinarily most people will not look at their shadow. And that's an absolute fact, and we can see that to be real in society. He goes on, while some traits peculiar to the shadow can be recognized without too much difficulty as one's own personal qualities, in this case, both insight and goodwill are unavailing, because the cause of the emotion appears to lie beyond all possibility of doubt in the other person. No matter how obvious it may be to the neutral observer that it is a matter of projections, there is little hope that the subject will perceive this himself. He must be convinced that he throws a long, very long shadow before he is willing to withdraw his emotionally toned projections from their object. So if we can think about what's going on right now, we can see, again, I'll say, and we can really think about this. Where do we do this in our own relationships to each other? And where is this happening in society? Because if we don't ask those questions and we don't see it, then we don't evolve it. And if we keep, just projecting and don't look at the shadow, then we just don't evolve. The soul journey just gets a lid put on it. So let us suppose that a certain individual shows no inclination whatsoever to recognize his projections. The projection-making factor then has a free hand and can realize its object, if it has one, or bring about some other situation characteristic of its power. As we know, it is not the conscious subject, but the unconscious which does the projecting. Hence, one meets with projections, one does not make them. The effect of projection is to isolate the subject from his environment, since instead of a real relation to it, there is now only an illusionary one. Projections change the world into a replica of one's own unknown face. In the last analysis, therefore, they lead to an autoerotic and autistic condition in which one dreams a world whose reality remains forever unattainable. The resilient sentiment of de-incompletude and the still worse feeling of sterility are in their turn explained by projection as the malevolence of the environment, and by means of this vicious circle, the isolation is intensified. The more projections are thrust in between the subject and the environment, the harder it is for the ego to see through its illusions. A 45-year-old patient who had suffered from a compulsion neurosis since he was 20 had become completely cut off from the world once said to me, "But I can never admit to myself that I've wasted the best 25 years of my life." So that's the other thing, the more we resist and don't look at our shadow, and the more we project it onto the world, the more we're really not living. We're not living our true, authentic self. Continuing reading. It is often tragic to see how blatantly a man bungles his own life and the lives of others, yet remains totally incapable of seeing how much the whole tragedy originates in himself, and how he continually feeds it and keeps it going. Not consciously, of course, for consciously he is engaged in bewailing and cursing a faithless world that recedes further and further into the distance. Rather, it is an unconscious factor which spins the illusions that veil his world, and what is being spun is a cocoon which in the end will completely envelope him. One might assume that projections like these, which are so very difficult, if not impossible to dissolve, would belong to the realm of the shadow, that is, to the negative side of the personality. This assumption becomes unattainable after a certain point, because the symbols that then appeared no longer refer to the same but to the opposite sex, in a man's case to a woman's, and vice versa. The source of projections is no longer the shadow, which is always of the same sex as the subject, but a transsexual figure. Here we meet the animus of a woman and the anima of a man, two corresponding archetypes whose autonomy and unconsciousness explain the stubbornness of their projections. Though the shadow is a motif as well known to mythology and as anima and animus, It represents first and foremost the personal unconscious, and its content can therefore be made conscious without too much difficulty. In this, it differs from the anima and the animus, for whereas the shadow can be seen through the recognized and recognized fairly easily, the anima and the animus are much further away from consciousness and in normal circumstances are seldom, if ever, realized. With a little self-criticism, one can see through the shadow, so far as its nature is personal, but when it appears as an archetype, one encounters the same difficulties as with the anima and the animus. In other words, it is quite within the bounds of a possibility for a man to recognize the relative evil of his nature, but it is rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. And it is, a lot of people will, resist and ignore the reality of what's going on. We're very shut down in society, really, right now, on free will. How much free will do we have to really say what we want to say and express our thoughts? But we can do it somehow through looking at these works, like I'm looking at and reading this to you now, because it gives us the ability to share and begin to take on board what we need to work on within ourselves. And a lot of people who've been through trauma, early trauma, and the imprints are able to, the more we look at that, the more we're doing this work of the shadow work as well. And now I'm going to do a new actually, I forgot to show you a beautiful picture before I move forward of Jung. I don't know how old he is here, but I love this picture. Beautiful soul indeed he was. He was a Leo sun. I will bring up his chart, not now, but at another time I will look at his chart and run through that, so for anybody that's interested. So now what I'm going to do is go to a new share. Firstly, I'm going to bring up this chart, which is mine. I'm going to show you Lilith, which I was explaining to you, which is the shadow. On my chart, you can see here with my pointer, it's 5 degrees of Pisces, which is worth noting on your own chart if you get your time, date, place of birth. So the time and the date are really important, clearly, but the time is really important to understand what houses the planets fall into. You can see here I'm Scorpio rising at 27 degrees. The rising sign changes every 2 hours. So Carl Jung used astrology himself with his patients, and he was into symbols also. What I want to tell you is that the shadow, currently Lilith takes 9 years to move around the chart. And if you can see here, Lilith is just in the sign of Taurus by 4 degrees here, just about conjuncting Uranus there. You can see that. If you don't know what Uranus looks like, that's Lilith and that's Uranus. And then what we have is that if we look at the shadow side of Lilith in Taurus, the shadow side is scarcity and insecurity, and it's to do with consumption, the issues there. And we're having these issues currently. We can see this in society. And I was born with it in the sign of Pisces. And Pisces, it's the shadow of trust and vulnerability. And, the issues are trust in others and God as well. So that can be seen in our life, how that's played out. It's in my 3rd house, so we would integrate that and bring in the idea of Gemini and the shadow of acceptance, and also the fear is rejection, and it's the issues of liked and disliked by others, thinking, am I liked, am I disliked? So this is beautiful shadow work to do if one understands the deeper aspects there. And also, yes, so Pisces, fear of vulnerability and harm. And in Taurus, it's the fear of scarcity, which is the collective chart. So now I'm going to also show you down here, if you look, I'm going to increase this so you can see better. So then you would look at aspects to your Lilith, which aspects speak. It's where the planets speak to each other. So if you look at my Lilith here, it's trying to let's see here, actually. If you look, we will go Lilith, and it's trying to my Jupiter, and it's also trying to my vertex. So trine to my Jupiter and trine to my vertex. You can see trine here, these blue lines, and that's an easy energy. Then I'm going to now go to another new share, and I'm going to show you my emanated chart. So this is solar fire that I work with when I'm working with people on their own charts and on early imprints and looking at wounding, and also where we're currently at with the transits. So the inside of the chart is a snapshot of the heavens at birth. There's my Black Moon Lilith at 5 degrees of Pisces, and then this is where the planets are right now on the outside of the chart. And let me see, actually that's 2021. I'm not being honest there. Let's see, 28th of November. That's it. So we have this, and this is we've got the planets right now, currently, and if we look to where Lilith is, she is at 4 degrees of Taurus. And if I go, let's just look at this. We've got it 5th house, 4 degrees of Taurus. It's just about to move into my 6th house. So if we go a year ahead, I'm going to show you that this takes 9 years to go around the chart. Look at Lilith here. So this is 1 year. This is 2021, 22, 23. You see Lilith moving here. That's 2023, 24, 25, 2026, 27, and 28. So then it would be on the 28th of November, 2028. It's going to be in my... Lilith will be 29 degrees of Pisces for me. So this is really beautiful work to do. I'm glad, you know, for me, I would say that Jung using astrology basically gave me the confidence to really dig deep into this work, because it's very archetypal, and planets would have been, or astrology would have been, one of the oldest tools of psychology. And if we go back, you know, 500 years, Nostradamus, we can go back previous to that. We also had Dante. We've had just some of the most amazing people in history. And if we go back pre-verbal, maybe caveman times, when we were pre-verbal, man would have been looking at the stars. So there's no doubt in my mind that this tool is extremely valuable to humanity. I'm going to leave it there, and book a session with me if you want me to help you. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks.